Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. My name is Scott Reich, and this is Crime Talk. A quick preview of the docket. Alec Murdaugh appears in court for the allegations of a double murder. That's right, his wife and son. And then we're going to talk about a hero in Indiana, and then our dumb criminal of the day. Let's talk about it. All right, aficionados, let's get started. You know the drill. First, subscribe if you have not done so. Hit that like button, hit that bell so that you receive notifications of when we go live or put up new content. I want to thank everybody for joining us last night on our live program. We talked a lot about the Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell matter and the fact that the DA is just now requesting DNA testing, which takes time. And we're only 4.5 months away from trial. And a lot of those disclosures have to be made early as well, or you can't use it regarding expert witnesses. So take a look if you are unable to join us last night. All right, let's go ahead and open the docket for Wednesday, July 20th, 2022. All right, first on the docket, Alec Murdaugh. But before we get there, do you remember a guy by the name of Russell Laffitte? That's right. That was Mr. Murdaugh's good buddy, friend, and banker. Well, guess what? He was also indicted today on a federal grand jury indictment in Charleston, alleging a longstanding conspiracy between unidentified bank customers, whose sources identify as Murdaugh, and Laffitte to use the bank as a tool for laundering money that Mr. Murdaugh allegedly stole. Now, Mr. Laffitte, he's 51, and he's charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud and misapplication of bank funds. He is looking at up to 30 years in prison. Can you imagine these guys sitting around thinking they own the low country down there in South Carolina and just thinking, they'll never know. They'll never know. We'll get away with it. Well, not for long. Anyway, we'll give them the presumption of innocence, but let's talk about Alec Murdaugh. Now, Alec Murdaugh arrived at a South Carolina court Wednesday for a hearing over last year's brutal murder of his wife and son, which saw Mr. Murdaugh plead not guilty to the double alleged slaying. Now, the hearing also saw Mr. Murdaugh denied bond for the alleged crime, with police officers now claiming that they have a mountain of evidence against him, including cell phone and video footage of him talking to his wife moments before she was killed. Now, when asked how he pled to the felony murder charges, Murdaugh sported a jail-style buzz cut for the court, and his appearance confidently asserted not guilty. Now, you may notice in the video of Mr. Murdaugh in court today, he has slimmed down. Apparently, he is at the detention center, burning a few calories, I guess, or basically not eating. But when you look at all his previous pictures, I would say he's down a good 40 to 50 pounds. Yes, the jail diet can do that for you. Now, when questioned by the prosecutors on how he will be tried, Mr. Murdaugh maintained, by God and by country. Now, he requested a speedy trial, and the state agrees to move the case forward as expeditiously as possible. The judge will ponder that along with the motion in regards to a gag order, so neither side can make extrajudicial statements regarding the case and potentially taint that potential jury pool. For those of you who are not familiar with the case, Mr. Murdaugh was once a pretty prominent lawyer, and his appearance has changed considerably since he was first arrested and now appears in court for the alleged double homicide of his wife and son. Now, both sides agreed that a bond should not be awarded to Mr. Murdaugh due to the fact that he's already in jail on a $7 million bond for some 74 other criminal charges, mostly financially related. Now, Mr. Murdaugh was filmed leaving the jail, as you can see here, before being carted back to jail. Now, more than a year after the bodies of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were found at their Hampton-Colleton County estate. The hearing, which started about 10 a.m. and lasted less than a half an hour, saw Mr. Murdaugh denied bond. And the judge, Judge Clifton Newman, the same judge who previously denied bond for him last October when the family of his former housekeeper accused him of stealing insurance money after her death. As he left in chains after being arraigned on the indictment. Now, police allege that Mr. Murdaugh shot Maggie, his wife, with a rifle and Paul, his son, with a shotgun at their Mosul property back in June of 2021. A motive for the slaying has yet to be determined. Well, at least not disclosed. Now, it's not known how police linked Mr. Murdaugh to the deaths after more than a year of investigation, but a law enforcement source with close personal knowledge of the case has told reporters that the police have a multitude of damning evidence against the ex-attorney. Now, the source states that shortly before the hearing, investigators had proved that Mr. Murdaugh was at the house when the murder took place due to blood spatter allegedly found on the then lawyer's clothes after the police arrived on the scene. Now, the evidence, if legitimate, contradicts claims that Mr. Murdaugh had been visiting his father at a nearby hospital at the time of the murder, only to return and find the bodies. Now, Mr. Murdaugh's cell phone, watch, and vehicle GPS allegedly contradict those claims as well. People oftentimes forget. I mean, we've mentioned this before. The phone, if you're going to commit a crime, and I'm not encouraging anyone to do so, but you don't take your phone. You don't take anything electronic. And that includes your car. Most new cars have GPS in them, and you would be amazed at the amount of information that can come from that. And apparently it can tell you, well, where you were and where you weren't in Mr. Murdaugh's case. Now, sources added that investigators are adamant that Murdaugh lured his wife to the scene under the guise that he wanted her to accompany him to visit his ailing father, with whom she was quite close. Now, the source also alleges that the couple, who had been influential figures in the South Carolina legal scene, had hit a rough patch in their marriage prior to the killings, and that Maggie, at the time of the slaying, was actually staying at the family's beach house on Edisto Island, roughly an hour from the family's estate. Now, it is also alleged that Maggie first declined the request from Murdaugh to meet at the family home, suggesting instead that they meet at the hospital. And after some convincing, however, she consented to meet at the home, saying that she would follow Alex to the hospital in her car. That's right. You always have to remember what the other person on the other phone has in their text messages as well. Now, on her way to the home, it's alleged that Maggie messaged a friend to tell her she felt uneasy about the arrangement and that she was worried that Murdaugh was up to something. The texts reportedly say that Maggie theorized that something about her husband's behavior felt fishy, with one of the messages flat out declaring he's up to something. The identity of the recipient of those texts has not yet been identified, so take it for what it's worth. Now, the alleged most damning piece of evidence is the investigators' possession of cell phone audio and video that the source said placed Murdaugh at the crime scene moments before the alleged murder of Maggie took place. Now, as you may recall, Mr. Murdaugh alleged that he was struggling with a debilitating opioid addiction, whereupon he went to treatment right after his friend allegedly tried to make it look like a murder so that he could collect some insurance money for his son. It has taken the police nearly 13 months to bring charges against Mr. Murdaugh, who's, as we stated, already behind bars for the alleged embezzlement, as well as attempting to stage his own murder as far as a $10 million insurance scam. Now, months after his wife and son were murdered, Murdaugh tried to stage his death so that Buster, his 26-year-old surviving son, could reap the sum, but was criminally charged when the suicide for hire plot fell apart and the attempt failed, and the hired hitman was arrested. Now, that incident transpired on September 4th, where Murdaugh apparently shot 3 times by 61-year-old Curtis Smith, one of the former Legal Eagle's many clients. However, according to police, he only suffered superficial gunshot wounds to the head. Now, Smith has since been charged with assisted suicide, aggravated assault, and battery related to the shooting, and he is awaiting trial on those charges. Now, meanwhile, Mr. Murdaugh was charged with a conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and jailed following month. His trial is also pending. Now, Murdaugh, whose father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were also top prosecutors in South Carolina for nearly a century, believed ending his life was his only option, and his lawyer said at the time, citing his spiraling opioid addiction, which they said evaporated Mr. Murdaugh's net worth over the course of the last 20 years. Jumping back to the murder of Paul and Maggie, Mr. Murdaugh originally told police he found the bodies of his youngest son and wife outside a series of dog kennels on the family's 1,700 square feet hunting estate about 10 p.m. on June 7th, 2021. In audio from the 911 call that he placed at 10:07 p.m. that night, Murdaugh can be heard telling the dispatcher in a high-pitched speech, "I need the police and I need an ambulance immediately. My wife and child were just shot badly." Now, Paul, who was only 22 at the time, was shot twice with a shotgun, once in the head and once in the chest. Maggie had been shot multiple times with an assault rifle, and their gunshot wounds were believed to be consistent with an execution-style killing, according to police reports. Now, according to many, Paul's body was found partially inside one of the kennels, while his mother's was several feet away, leading investigators to believe that she ran from her killer before being gunned down. Now, at least 2 of the gunshot wounds were believed to have been inflicted while she was on the ground. In the immediate aftermath of the discoveries, the Murdaugh family and attorneys vehemently defended Mr. Murdaugh, who they asserted had an ironclad alibi and that his marriage was full of nothing but love. However, Mr. Murdaugh's alibi was far from airtight and has changed significantly since his initial claims that he was nowhere near the property between 9 and 9:30 p.m., the time the coroner gave the approximation for the time of death. Now, in the immediate aftermath of the crime, Murdaugh told investigators that he was visiting his dying father and his mother roughly 11 miles away at their home in Varnville at the time of the murders. Now, 2 weeks later, Murdaugh's brother, John Marvin, and Randy Murdaugh told Good Morning America that he had, in fact, dropped his father at a hospital in Savannah before going to visit his mother, who has dementia. Now, according to an account given by Murdaugh's lawyer, Jim Griffin, to the state newspaper, Mr. Murdaugh claims to have left the property around 9 p.m. to make the 20-minute drive to his mother's house and return to Mosul, originally claimed at about 10 p.m. It is an account that places him squarely on the scene within the time frame of the alleged killings. Now, it's also been speculated that audio and video data gleaned from Paul's cell phone, found by his body, but only recently unlocked by law enforcement, is what prompted Murdaugh's dramatic change of tune. It's been reported that not only does this audio and video data show Murdaugh speaking with Maggie, but that high-velocity impact spatter of blood found on his clothing that night places him at the scene of the murder when at least one of the victims was killed. Now, the marriage, as I said, was described as full of love, according to multiple sources, was anything but that. One source familiar with the household has stated that Maggie and Murdaugh's marriage was a union in crisis. Rumors that Murdaugh was having an affair with a fellow attorney have been widely circulated both locally and online. And according to the source who spoke with the newspapers, there was no love lost between the once loving couple. In fact, it's been reported that months before her death, Maggie and Murdaugh had argued heatedly over finances. Now, Maggie was apparently quite the stalwart of the South Carolina charity scene, had been socially embarrassed when a check written by her at a charity luncheon bounced. Can you imagine the embarrassment? Well, it is one of the incidents that saw her not only asking questions about family finances, but demanding answers as well. Now, also reported that Maggie was living separately from the Murdaughs at their home at Edisto Beach, and that she had only gone to Mosul on the night of her death reluctantly at Murdaugh's request. Maggie has also reported to have had gone to see a divorce lawyer in the weeks before the murder, sparking speculation that she was threatening to call in a forensic accountant. At the same time, Murdaugh was under extreme pressure to cough up his financial records as part of the wrongful death lawsuit being brought against him and his older son, Richard Buster Murdaugh Jr., by the family of Mallory Beach, the teenager killed in the boat crash back in 2019, where it was alleged that Paul was drunk and at the wheel of the boat when it slammed into the pilings on Archers Creek with 6 teens, all underage, all heavily intoxicated. Now, Mallory Beach, who was 19 at the time, was thrown from the vessel and her body found by 2 fishermen 1 week later, 5 miles from the crash site. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma and drowning. Now, the Beach family lawyers had repeatedly pressed Murdaugh for financial disclosures and set a court deadline of June 9th, just 2 days after Maggie and Paul's murder, for him to hand over all relevant paperwork. Only Murdaugh knew that he was in neck deep in debt and what prosecutors alleged was a multi-million-dollar insurance fraud scheme and alleged criminal enterprise. Now, in the months following, investigators looking into Maggie and Paul's death uncovered a litany of crime and insurance fraud that have seen them reopen 2 suspicious deaths linked to the family. Former housekeeper Gloria Satterfield, who fell after a trip and fall or slip and fall at the Mosul property in 2018, and a local teen by the name of Stephen Smith. Satterfield's son said they were defrauded out of $4.3 million wrongful death suit brought against Murdaugh on his own advice and with the promise that he would take care of them. Instead, it appears as though Mr. Murdaugh siphoned off those funds for himself, allegedly with the help of Corey Fleming, a former University of South Carolina roommate and fellow attorney who recommended the Satterfield's brother's use. Fleming has also been charged for his part in that scheme. Now, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, also known as SLED, recently announced that it had received permission from Satterfield's family to have her body exhumed. And the Hampton County coroner, Angie Topper, asked investigators to look at Satterfield's death again due to inconsistencies. These include the facts that her office was never informed, meaning no autopsy was conducted, and that the manner of death given on the death certificate was listed as natural, and that was not consistent with a trip and fall. Now, the manner of Smith's death is also, again, the subject of investigation. The 19-year-old's body was found on a road in Hampton County in July of 2015 with a head wound so devastating that investigators first thought he had been shot. Police reports revealed that the incident was in fact initially investigated as a homicide, but recategorized as a hit and run in the face of strong opposition from the lead investigator, who was one of the first officers on the scene and found no evidence of any vehicular involvement. Now, in addition to this, 15 state grand jury indictments containing 79 charges have come down against Mr. Murdaugh, with prosecutors claiming he defrauded a staggering $8.4 million from victims. The truly dire state of his financial affairs may go some way to explaining one of the most bizarre twists in this entire saga. Mr. Murdaugh's failed suicide for hire plot just 3 months after Maggie and Paul's death, and 1 day after he resigned from the family Hampton-based law firm. Now, the firm, formerly known as Parker Murdaugh, Parker, Ellsworth, and Dietrich, or PMPED, stripped the Murdaugh name from their masthead in January and has since rebranded as the Parker Law Group. The firm later claimed that Murdaugh misappropriated company funds, and at least one Murdaugh's former colleague is among many bringing suits against him. As we mentioned, and we brought you, I think, one of the first stories too when the boating accident took place, is that something seemed off. Something seemed as though there was, well, a cover-up, so to speak. And little did we know that this was all going to come to a head now with the financial crimes, the attempted suicide, the drug dealing charges, and now 2 counts of first-degree murder, where Mr. Alec Murdaugh, through his attorneys, are demanding a speedy trial within 60 to 90 days of today's date, assuming the court can accommodate that, apparently under the rules of South Carolina. This could get interesting. We've talked about this before. The best bet to win in a case such of this nature is to go on the first setting and see if the prosecution is really, in fact, ready. The prosecution said that they'll accommodate anything that the court desires, but they said that the discovery is quite voluminous today in court. And let's let the defense take a look at that before we get too carried away with the speedy trial, so to speak. So we'll see how this is all going to turn out, but it is going to get interesting. Next on the docket, let's talk about a hero. Now, the man who shot down the gunman who killed 3 people in a shopping mall near Indianapolis on Sunday has been identified as Elijah Dicken, a 22-year-old from Seymour, Indiana. Now, the Good Samaritan of the Greenwood Mall shooting, as his lawyer has dubbed him, is considered responsible for stopping the mass shooter, who was armed with 2 rifles, a handgun, and more than 100 rounds in his possession. The gunman had fired 24 rounds of ammunition, according to the police, before Dicken, who was at the mall with his girlfriend, drew his pistol out and shot him dead. The gunman was killed about 2 minutes into the assault. Now, not much is publicly known about Mr. Dicken, besides the fact that he was legally carrying a 9mm Glock handgun. In Indiana, carrying a gun no longer requires a permit as of July 1, and that is known as constitutional carry. But he was technically not allowed to bring the gun to the mall because, you know, those gun-free zones don't want any guns in there. Oh, that's right, because the bad guys take them in there. Well, the good guy, thank God, ignored gun-free zone, and when the shooting happened, in the gun-free zone, that's when Mr. Dicken stepped into action, and the mall issued a statement expressing gratitude toward Mr. Dicken's intervention. Gee, do you think they're going to ban him for that? Because he had a gun but stopped a mass shooter in a gun-free zone? Because these cowards, these mass shooters, are nothing but cowards. They go to soft targets where they know it's going to be a gun-free zone, and no one's going to shoot back. And look what happens when people shoot back. Get the bad guy. Good on Mr. Dickens. Congratulations. I hope nothing but good comes for you. Yes, you'll have to deal with the fact that you killed a bad guy, but guess what? And always remember and never forget, he was a bad guy, and the bad guy deserved killing. All right, next on the docket, our dumb criminal of the day. Please meet Joshua Murray. Now, he held the door for 2 women at a Family Dollar store in Connecticut on Saturday afternoon and apparently got a little upset. You must ask why. Because the 2 ladies that he held the door open for didn't thank him, and he became upset, really upset. Now, Mr. Murray is accused of then brandishing a firearm in his anger and pointing it at multiple customers. And according to the police, Mr. Murray was arrested near the business, and they say that he interfered with them when they took him into custody. He is charged with carrying a pistol without a permit, a felony plus misdemeanor charges of interfering with an officer, and 2 counts of second-degree breach of the peace. No one was injured in the incident. Well, Mr. Murray, here's a good little tidbit. Don't get too upset, okay? You can't let these things get you upset because, well, no good deed goes unpunished, okay? And yes, you opened the door. You did just expect it. And I'm sure they said thank you inside. But now look at this. You, sir, got so upset on something so insignificant, you're now facing a felony conviction, and you've made it to be a contestant for the dumb criminal of the day. Congratulations. But was it worth it? I don't think so. All right. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Crime Talk.